Rain? Would you rather have snow? What? I thought this was a Christian church. Exactly. That's what I'm talking about. And I am the shovel at my house. I think, what is it, every inch of rain is 10 to 12 inches of snow? Isn't it? I'd rather have rain. Okay. Well, this is our family Sunday. Every time we have 5 Sundays in a month, we keep all the family together in service. Some of you will love that, some of you will not. But when I was a kid, I thought it'd be a good opener to talk about the first scuffle I ever got into. You know how in 4th grade everybody's a black belt in karate? Well, I was also a black belt in karate, and I told everybody that. Well, there was 2 kids who would ride their bikes everywhere. They were older kids, and they would always bully the younger kids in our neighborhood. This is back in ancient times when we still played outside. And you know, there's good and bad to that. And he picked a fight with us once, and we were sitting there, and they rode up to us at this park that was a block away from the housing projects we lived in. So they rolled up, and they were picking a fight, and some of my new friends, well, they had just learned that I was a black belt in karate. So they weren't worried at all when this bully came up and started picking fights with us. They said, you know what? Our friend's a black belt in karate. I was like, shut up, because this kid was like a head taller than me. And I was not actually I'm going to come clean now. I was not a black belt in karate. Yeah, I was not. I'm still not. And so we actually ended up doing a fight kind of thing. But it was the strangest thing because we were like circling each other and pretending like we both knew Kung Fu. And at some point, I grabbed him and I did a thing. I must have saw it on TV or something, but I flipped him over and he hit the ground really hard. And it took the wind out of him. And then he got up and he like made an excuse and the bullies left. And my friends came up running. They were like, we thought you were lying, but you do have a black belt in karate. It's so amazing. I know now it's actually like a real judo sacrifice throw, but I just did it intuitively. And so that was a pretty glorious day. But I'd like to say it was courage that drove me into that scuffle. But it was more like the pressure of not looking like a lying moron. You know what I mean? I don't know if that's courage or what that inspiration is, but that's why I went into that. Years later, when I was 13 years old, we moved to Cheney. My mom started going to college. And I don't remember why, but we were at the ice skating rink downtown. It was in a different place back then. But we were skating around, and I don't know why I thought it'd be funny to push my friend from behind when he was skating. But it seemed like a good idea at the time. So he's just skating, and I had no skills, but I knew how to go fast and then crash into the wall to stop. Well, he was the wall that time. So I just got tons of momentum, and I just pushed him as hard as I could because I thought it'd be hilarious just to see him go flying. Well, instead of him flying, his feet went like this. And then he went to catch himself like that. And so he landed, and then he got up holding his arm. And I thought, oh, man. And he was crying, and his arm hurt a lot. And I thought, oh, so sorry. It was like the, shh, don't tell mom, you know. I was like, I'm sorry. And the next Monday, I was going to skip school because I didn't know what had happened. And you know, you're young, you don't understand the world. So I thought maybe like I knocked him down and hurt his arm and gave him cancer. Maybe he died over the weekend, you know. You just don't know stuff when you're that young. And so I had built this up in my mind to be this huge, terrible thing. And so I think I'm just going to skip school today because I don't want to face whatever's going on. I was lacking courage that day. I ended up going, and they called me to the office at a class. I thought, oh man, they found out I killed my friend. Like, this is not good. I'm going to go to jail forever. And so I was making my way to the office just slowly, you know, like a man going to the electric chair. And I finally got there, and they just wanted to tell me that he had broken his arm, and he went to the doctor and got a cast, and that's why he wasn't at school today. So I shouldn't worry because he's going to be okay. Then they sent me back to class. And I was so relieved because I thought I was going to jail, you know. Walking to the office, the office was like this domain of adults in my school. And every time a kid went to the office, it was bad. Well, every time I went to the office, it was bad. And so I was like a child going to this domain of adults, and I felt super helpless and powerless there, and I thought going to the office for sure meant trouble. In this psalm, they do kind of this interesting exercise, because we've all been in helpless situations, right? I mean, maybe this week, but we've all been in situations where we needed help from the outside. There was a problem we couldn't solve on our own. There's an issue we were facing we didn't have the strength for in that moment. We've always had those helpless situations. It might not have been as silly as facing down a bully, right? And it might not be as silly as thinking you were going to go to jail for breaking your friend's arm by being an idiot kid. But I'll tell you, since then, I'm 47 now. I've had lots of situations in life where I felt absolutely helpless. Like there was nothing I could do about whatever I was facing. And we've all had those times. So here's what they're doing in the psalm. They're saying, okay, what if in all these helpless situations, God was not on our side? They're looking back on their life and they're saying, what would life be like now if God was never with us? If God wasn't on our side? Now, here's what not on our side means. Life is a team sport, right? I mean, it is, whether you like it or not. It's a team sport. Let's say you line up and you're playing football and you see God as a center for the other team. Okay, you'd rather have God be on your line, right, instead of theirs. And so that's what God not being on your side. It's like he's on the other side, or he's at least not fighting for you. And so we're going to walk through this psalm, and we're going to see kind of how this works out. So verse 1 says, what if the Lord had not been on our side? Let all Israel repeat, the whole nation. What if the Lord had not been on our side when people attacked us? So here's the first helpless situation they're talking about, being attacked. Now, we don't know what that's like here. I've never experienced an invading army, pouring into Spokane from Canada. Just maybe soon, I don't know, but it hasn't happened yet. We'd win, by the way. All of Canada could take out Spokane and we would win. Just saying. There's no way they would get through all the preppers up in Chattaroy. Like, we wouldn't even have to fight here. We'd be fine. All those hunters up there, we'd be just fine. So, but here's the question they ask. What if the Lord had not been on our side when people attacked us? They would have swallowed us alive in their burning anger. And Israel had seen a lot of war. Excuse me. Where they're at in the world, they're on this little land bridge between all of Europe and Asia and Africa. And that's the only land bridge that links those two areas. So guess what piece of land people from Europe and Asia were always fighting people from Africa over? It was that little piece of land that Israel lived on. And so they were caught between the hammer and the anvil. And so you had all these Mesopotamian civilizations, right? You had the Assyrians, the Babylonians. Then you had eventually the Roman Empire over more in Europe. And then in the south, you always had Egypt in northern Africa. That was a huge power. And they're always fighting over that piece of land. And there's stories of wars that happen in the Bible. David was involved in some of them. Some of the kings of old who are mentioned in the Bible died in battles between Egypt and a larger power. So war would swallow up those people a lot. In fact, in 722, they had a civil war and they became two countries. The whole northern country was decimated. And then 586, the southern country was decimated. And they were swallowed up by war eventually. And so they had seen war too much. And they're asking the question, what if God had never protected us when war came? I'm not going to camp on this because I'm not going to preach forever today. But it's funny how courageous people are when there's no war. Right? How tough people talk when war is not happening. But I think we've learned recently how compliant a population will really be. You guys with me? We'd like to think we'd be always on the right side of history and rebels, but I'm not convinced now. In fact, I'm convinced otherwise. And so they're saying if this other army would have come in and God was not on our side and we were helpless to defend ourselves, they would have swallowed us up. Here's another helpless situation they think about. The waters would have engulfed us, a torrent would have overwhelmed us. Yes, raging waters of their fury would have overwhelmed our lives. we can't relate to this as much because we don't have a lot of floods in this part of the country. But where they lived, there were a lot of floods. All the four great ancient civilizations grew up on plains that were in deltas. You know, the Nile Delta, your Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley. So all those ancient ones, and they were prone to flooding. The flooding in Egypt was pretty predictable, and the flooding in Mesopotamia was very erratic and unpredictable. And now you have some information on ancient flooding that you never knew you needed. But that's why there's so much poetry in the Bible about flooding. In fact, when you go to Genesis 1, what is the Spirit of God doing? It's hovering over the waters. So in the beginning there's waters, but it's all chaos. So what does God have to do to organize the world so that life can happen? He has to separate the waters above from the waters below. Then he has to make dry ground appear. Then he has to decide what the limits of the water is. Because they had this fear in the ancient world that water could just pour over and swallow everything. And if they had a globe, that might not help them. Some of you don't know what a globe is. In ancient times, we had this orb that could tell us the terrain of the whole planet. But whenever you look at a globe, you always look where the land is, right? Did you ever spin it to the backside and just look at the Pacific Ocean? Did you know there's a whole side of the globe where there's no land? It's just all blue. It's all water. And so they had this fear that all that water could just destroy everything. In fact, there's kind of a story in the Old Testament. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but there's this thing called the flood that killed everybody. Right? The waters came in and just swept everybody away. If you go forward in the book of Job, there's this creature, this monster called Leviathan that lives in the water. It's like this fire-breathing, smoke out of the nostrils, scales are like armor, huge creature. And it actually moves with the flood and lives in the flood. And you can actually go online and look up pictures of flash floods. Or you can see a footage of the tsunami that hit Japan, Indonesia, and all that whole area. Water can be devastating. And so maybe our equivalent is like ice storm. You guys remember that year? I keep dating myself this sermon, huh? Globes, playing outside, ice storm. So one year we had rain, then snow, then rain, then snow, then rain, then snow. And we all ended up with a bunch of ice on everything. And then Spokane died for like a week. It was crazy. So think of a natural disaster like that. And they're thinking if God had not helped during that flood, if God had not done something, we would have been drowned. Have you seen footage of the tsunami, by the way? When those waves crash into a city and buildings are leveled and cars look like little Hot Wheels just floating in a bathtub. It is crazy. You think, what would you do to stop that? You would need God's help. Okay, they have two more examples. Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord who did not let their teeth tear us apart. So here's another picture of like a predator hunting. A predator hunting them down. And this was more a reality in probably the ancient world than in our day, because we have great shelters that we live in all the time. Most of us don't have to work outside. We don't have to kill our own meat, you know. But in a fist fight with an animal, humans would usually lose. We just would. It's so funny. Have you guys seen that scale of animals that men think they could beat? Did you know 6% of men think they could take a grizzly bear in a fight? In a hand-to-hand fight. Grizzly bears. A lot of guys think they could take a wolf. Okay, Chief. I've seen grown men run from an angry goose. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't think you're killing a wolf or a bear or whatever else you think you can take. So the idea is that a predator is bearing down on them, and that feeling of impending death is there. And they're saying if God had not intervened, if he was not on our side, we would have been torn to pieces. We would have died. And the last illustration they use is we escaped like a bird from a hunter's trap. The trap is broken, and we are free. So the picture here is somebody like a hunter, like a trapper who has a trap out and catches a bird. And Israel is the bird that's caught in the trap. And say, if God had not intervened, we would have been stuck in that trap forever, and the trapper would have got us. And when you go through the Bible, there's all these situations that Israel faced, and people faced in the New Testament where they were absolutely helpless. and where they needed God's help. At one point, the Assyrian army, the whole army was camped outside of a city, and they were going to siege the city and take the city, and there's no way Israel would have survived. And what God did is he sent an angel that killed 180,000 of those soldiers in one night, and when they woke up, the whole Assyrian army had left. That was God's intervention. There's even smaller things, like people with a sickness. You know, sometimes we have people we love who are sick, right? And we feel so helpless because we can't help them when we don't know what to do. Sometimes doctors don't even know what to do. And there was this one woman who had been bleeding for several years. She had all kinds of problems. And Jesus healed her. And he had a conversation with her afterward. And if Jesus hadn't been in that room, if God had not been on our side, she would have never been healed. Speaking of being trapped, we think of Jesus, who, when he went back to Jerusalem near the end of his life, all of his disciples were like, this is probably a trap. And Jesus said, yeah, this is definitely a trap, but it's time for this to happen. And so he allowed it. And so he deliberately walked into Jerusalem, did things that would provoke the right people, and Jesus ended up getting arrested. And after Jesus was arrested, he went to trial several times. And a few times during the trial, he had ways out. He could have defended himself. He could have did this or that. But he chose to remain silent instead. And he manipulated the situation to where God's will would happen. And he actually willfully remained in the trap. And remember, all the disciples, what they thought Jesus was going to do is that they didn't think Jesus was just going to teach a bunch of good ideas and then teach about love and just give people good ideas for life. They thought Jesus was going to show up and actually establish a kingdom and be a king and destroy the Romans so that the Jews could have their own country back. And what ended up happening? Jesus got murdered. Like, he died on the cross. And do you remember the reaction of all the disciples after that happened? They went home. It was over. He wasn't going to be king. He was dead now. The trap had succeeded and the bird had died. The predator had torn up the prey. And so it had seemed like all was lost. And then, of course, God was on Jesus' side, so he raises Jesus from the dead on the third day. And he comes back to life. And the same people who are going home are now going into the cities and preaching about Jesus, even when people are threatening them that they're going to die if they keep preaching Jesus. And they willfully die preaching about Jesus because they had seen Jesus raised from the dead. You can walk forward through the life of Paul, through the letters. You can go through the general letters, and you can go through the book of Revelation. You can see if God's not on our side, humans are helpless. And you can see all the times where God jumped in and saved people. Did all that, did all this. We're making good time. So what the psalm ends here is by praising God. So here's the flow of this psalm real quick. They start out saying, okay, if God had not been on our side, how would these things played out? And I want you to do that with your life real quick. Were there situations in your life where you probably should have died? Were there situations in your life where your family probably shouldn't have survived? Like intact, so I'm talking. Were there situations in your life where you had no idea what to do next? And God intervened. And God saved you. Maybe God saved your marriage. Maybe God saved one of your kids. Maybe God healed a friend who was sick that you were praying for. Maybe you should have actually died and God saved you from a situation where you should have actually died, because a lot of us are morons and we flirt with death too much. When we look back on all the ways that God has intervened, the thing I think about, honestly, is my family. So I didn't grow up a Christian. You guys know this. I've talked about this before. I had well over 30 girlfriends through high school. So what do you think my family life was destined to look like after high school? Do you think it looked like one long-term stable relationship? No, it didn't fit the pattern. And so I became a Christian, and God really impressed upon me that I needed to be single for a year because I had no idea what I was doing, because I kept dating people after I was a Christian. And so I said, okay, Lord, this is going to be terrible because I've never been single more than a week. But I decided to stay single for a year. And I was able to do that, actually, for about a year and a half. A year and a half later, I started dating somebody who I'd eventually marry. That'd be my wife, Michelle. And here in a few weeks, we're going to celebrate 25 years married, which is awesome. Yep. We have 4 beautiful daughters, and they grew up in a home with both parents. And I got to tell you, it wasn't because of our skill. If God was not on our side, right, I don't think we would have made it. But you know, what's my saying? I say it all the time. There's 2 kinds of marriages, right? Those that don't make it, and those that make it by the skin of the teeth. Yeah, that's right. So God changed my life in such a way, when I look back on it, the deep, fulfilling relationship I have with my family, the way I enjoy my kids, the way we were all together this Christmas. And we have so much love in our family, we can bring extra people into our family, like my daughter's new husband, Trevor. The blessing that is, without God, that just wouldn't be there. It just wouldn't, and I know that. I'd be visiting different kids on a schedule, and it wouldn't be what it is. Without God in our life, on our side, working for us, even when we don't see it, can we agree things would be much, much worse? And so when we look back and we see all the wonderful things that God has done in our life, and we praise God like they do in this, it reminds us of God's goodness. And what that should do is it should give us courage when we look to the future. So when we look in the past and we remember God's goodness, that should help us remember his goodness in the future. I wish it did that more. You know, we live in a unique point in time right now, and the culture is in a very strange place. Things are bizarre, right? One of the things I feel really defines our culture right now is cowardice. We live in a culture of cowardice. No, we talk like we're bold, but the way we actually live, we live in a culture of cowardice. And I have a list of things I want to go through here. So let's just talk about different aspects of cowardice and what it means, and we'll see if we see it in our culture. Deal? All right, you guys are excited. Calm down. Okay, so the first thing, people who are cowardly they're easily frightened. Right? They become afraid easy. Do you think we live in a culture that is easily frightened? We are so blessed at this point in history, and we think we're cursed. It is so crazy. Nobody in the history of humankind has had the kind of comfort and material blessing that we experience in our day. And I was having breakfast with some friends yesterday, and we were talking about this is the sweet spot in history. As a Gen Xer, I have the best time in history because I get all the benefits of technology before they take over and AI rules the world. You know, it's like this perfect sweet spot in history. I tell Hope and my daughters, you guys got to figure that problem out. You got to solve Skynet or the Matrix. But for me, I'm like, I get all the benefits of this technology and none of the curse. But think about it. I drove 7 miles to church today from my house. How long would that take me to walk? In the rain. Or what if I did it by horse-drawn carriage on a terrible road? How long would that take? See, the ease that we get to be in the same room together is actually a miracle. That all of us from Oliver, Spokane, and Colbert, and Chattaroy, and wherever else you're from, we all get to be here together in this room, and we get to be friends and connect with each other. This is the only time in history that's been possible. It took me 12 minutes to drive 7 miles today. That would have been a long walk. And we get to be together. And not only do we get to be together, we get to be in this room where we control the weather. I get to have amplification to my voice so I don't have to yell and I can talk like a normal person. I mean, there's so many blessings. You all have phones in your pocket that are more advanced than just any computer that's ever existed before today. And it fits in your pocket. I remember when my friend Alan got the Atari. Dude, it was amazing. There's this game called Pong. You don't even know. Like some of you know. It was so advanced and the graphics were beautiful. But we watched it, we're like, we're actually controlling the thing on the screen. This is crazy. We're controlling the paddle. And it blew our minds. Then this thing called the Commodore 64 came out. You guys know what that is? And we thought we were living in space, man. We thought it was the Jetsons already. And this is back in the day where calculators still took up a half a room, you know what I mean? But you know what fits in your pocket now, what that thing can do? It's a blessing and a curse. But the fact that we have it is amazing. And we have all these blessings, and some of the poorest people in our country live better than the kings of old. They do, because they can go to a grocery store and get any meal on command. And no king in the ancient world could ever do that. If they wanted Chinese, guess what they had to do? They had to dispatch someone to go to China, right? And then maybe months later, if that person didn't die and they brought back the right products, they could have kind of a Chinese meal. You know how long it takes me to get DoorDash on my phone with fake Chinese food that is still good? I'm like, extra MSG, it's good for the heart. We live in an amazing time, but we think we're so cursed and we're so easily frightened. The things I hear people talk about that they fear things that don't even exist yet. We want to be frightened so much, we look into the future and we find reasons to be afraid. And parenting has changed a lot. Do you think parenting now is a culture of confidence or a culture of fear? Man, a lot of kids can't play outside anymore unless it's in their fenced yard. And their parents have signed waivers from all the kids who play with them at the house. And that's not the kids' fault. Kids are wild animals. They will go and play. And maybe they'll be back before dark. Maybe they'll live. Maybe they won't. But it's the parents. And what's interesting is many parents aren't parenting so much as they're managing their own anxiety through their children. Right? That's based on fear. I mean, you have cops getting called on a parent who lets their kids walk 6 blocks outside. Another characteristic, in addition to being easily frightened of cowardice, is people avoid danger. Do you think we live in a culture that actively avoids danger? Now, granted, we should avoid danger sometimes, right? Like if a car comes in my lane, I should avoid that. I should swerve around it. So there are situations where it's smart to avoid danger. But bravery, courage, which is the opposite of cowardice, that means you know how to move toward danger when it's necessary. And I'm not convinced we have that culture anymore. I'm not convinced. People actively avoid danger in our culture, even perceived danger. I'll talk about one thing. I don't know, I'm talking about parenting a lot today. Maybe it's because kids are in here. But a lot of parents feel like any suffering their kids go through is a form of trauma and a reflection on their incompetent parenting. But we realize our kids exist in this world, right? The same world you grew up in. Like, to exist is to experience danger. And the worst thing you can do is to constantly avoid danger for yourself or for your children, so when you're there no longer pampering them, they encounter the world by themselves and they're not equipped for it. Like, your son should know how to kill a dragon. Right? They should know how to hold a sword. They should know how to swing a hammer. They should encounter a situation they don't understand, and they should know that they can figure it out. My favorite phrase to my daughters would come up and say, "Hey, Dad, I go, "Okay, figure it out." I was a good parent and really lazy. But you know what's amazing about my children? They can figure it out. They can figure it out. Lily's brakes went bad on her car, so we changed her brakes. I did the first one, she did the other ones. If she needs to change her brakes again, she can do it. Because she can do stuff, and she knows she can do stuff. And when they get jobs, they do really well at their jobs because they know they can do stuff. And so they do stuff, and they do it good. Always avoiding danger, it's not wisdom, it's pathology. In our culture, we just feel like any form of suffering, any form of danger, it needs to be avoided because we truly think the path to happiness is constant comfort. Oh, here's a good one. Not only do we avoid danger, but we also avoid difficulty. We avoid struggle. I mean, it's another way of saying we avoid discomfort, right? And here's the line I wrote. People will do things because they're achievable, not because they're good. Sometimes we won't try a thing because we know we're going to fail at it, as if that mattered. It's important to do things because they're good, not because you think they're achievable. Amen? I watch like cooking shows because my wife makes me. And then I get hungry watching them, so I order food and eat a big meal right before bed. Then I wake up chubby, you know? But you know what people always say on cooking shows, reality shows? They always say failure's not an option. When it's clearly an option. Like, most of you are going to be eliminated from this competition. And I think almost everyone who says failure's not an option, they fail. And I was like, looks like it was an option, right? But in our culture, I feel like failing righteously is not an option. Like if your marriage is struggling, your wife might leave you. But does that mean you shouldn't love her as tenaciously and in godly a way as possible until she leaves? Doesn't mean you shouldn't love her like Christ loved the church until she leaves. You might not be able to fix it. That doesn't mean you can't face it with courage. Just because you're going to lose a fight doesn't mean you don't fight. And I see a lot of people in our culture, they judge whether they're going to attempt a thing based on whether they can succeed or not, and that's a form of cowardice. We do things because they're the right thing to do. Right, church? Whether it'll work or not. So God always commands us to forgive. Will forgiveness heal every relationship? No. But we still try. The last thing I'll say is another aspect of cowardice. I wrote this and it says, the bark is bigger than their bite. The bark is bigger than their bite. And here's what I mean. Have you guys ever heard this phrase? It's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. That's a good one, huh? I got a little Kenji riff on it. A lot of people are gardeners in a garden pretending to be warriors. And that's a form of cowardice. So right now I think of the person who's a keyboard warrior, right? Typing fiercely on the chat, bringing truth to the masses. And they're so bold and they'll talk about what it means to be a good person and what it means to change the world in a chat room, but they won't go do it. They'll tell everyone else how to hold a shovel, but they won't dig. You know, they'll preach to everyone else how you hold the hammer, but they've never built anything in their lives. And what it is, it's a cheap form of imitation virtue. Because when we condemn things we see as unrighteous, it makes us feel righteous, and it makes us feel as if we're making the world a right place to live. But what actually does the work? When you're off the couch and you're in the world doing things. It's amazing. I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine. A newer pastor, and they planted a church. I won't give too many details because this was a real conversation. They're years into a church plant, and it's the size of a Bible study. Okay? I'm not judging that. It's just important to the story later. If you just want an awesome Bible study forever, go for it. Small, tiny churches, they're all great. I was chatting with him, though, and he kind of went on this rant. Well, it was a rant. You know when people just start preaching? Dude, that's so bad at pastors' meetings. If you ever get a chance to go to a pastor's meeting, I do not recommend it. Imagine like 30 guys sitting around and gals sitting around, and someone asks a question, and then you hear 30 sermons in a row. It's like it takes a preacher 20 minutes to say hi, right? It's just the worst. And so, Manny loves those meetings, by the way. Yeah. One of your pastors here, he's encouraged. He's like, yeah, I love that mini sermon. That was great. It spoke right to my heart. I'm like, I wish you just shut up. We're going to be here all day. We're supposed to have tacos for lunch. And so, anyway, It was just a conversation with a couple of us, though, and he went on this rant about why the American church is so lame. And he's had all kinds of stuff about why the American church is lame and it's not being effective and it's stuck in the past and blah, 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 blah. And this is how you reach people. And he went on this long rant about this is how you reach people for the gospel. This is how you change culture. You have to not only be individualistic, but you have to be systemic, and you have to look from that approach. And people don't do that now because they're scared to encounter and confront institutional evil. And what they like to do is have manageable sin in the churches. And he was just going off. And I was just sitting there going, oh. I was totally checked out. And he didn't seem to mind. Like, he just finished his sermon. And after it was over, I thought, okay, I'm just not in the mood for this today. So he finished his rant. I go, that's awesome, brother. You seem to have a really good grasp on how to reach people for Christ. How many people have you led to Christ in the last year? Then what are you talking about? Right? Am I being mean here? I can't read the room. Everyone's very quiet. But it's like we substitute pretending to know about a thing for doing the thing. And the world has enough of that. And we have enough culture, we have enough Christians in the church boldly proclaiming the truth, but not actually helping anybody. Yeah, I know right from wrong too. You want to get in a verse battle with me? We can do that. Like, I know the scriptures. I can quote them. But when I'm interacting with people, I have one concern, and that's saving them from the fires of eternal hell, right? That's what I really care about. I want people to move more into the middle of God's will and more into the flourishing joy and happiness that he has for their life and farther away from hell. And that's my concern. I have a million arguments I can marshal to the thing they just said, and I can overwhelm them with my verbal IQ. Was that going to bring them closer to Christ? No, I'll win. But what actually leads people to Christ? People skills. Seriously, people skills is what brings people to Christ. You can communicate the truth in a way that's convincing. And a lot of us, we just slap people with what we think is the truth at the time, and we think that's being brave. It's not being brave. The world has plenty of this. And I'm sad to say the church has some of this too. When I hear some Christians talk about the future of the church in America or the future of the world, a lot of times I get the impression they don't realize God wins. I just get the impression they don't realize that God wins in the end. Like, you should read the book of Revelation. He wins, and he wins in fantastic, awesome fashion. It's amazing. What does the world need now? It needs a lot of stuff, right? But it needs some people in this world to display what faith looks like and what courage means. It needs people who can look into the future with faith because they've seen everything in the past and they make it a habit of remembering everything as God has done in the past, so that when they go into the future, they go into it with confidence. Because they know God has saved me from that and that and that and that and this and this and this and this. And in the future, I think he's going to save me more. And these situations I was helpless in. And if instead of frantically trying to control situations we can't control and rest in the peace of God and endure suffering patiently, knowing that we cannot fix the situation, but God will save us because that's what God does, is when we're helpless to act, God enters into the situation and he'll die on the cross to show you how much he will act to save you. And because God has a habit of doing that, we should be the people of faith who look into the future and know that God is on our side. And we should live like it, and we should brag about Jesus every chance we get. I think Christians should be excited for the future. We shouldn't shrink away like those who are afraid. But a spirit of power, self-control, and faith, confidence that God is going to continue to act in the world. There's some people in your life, maybe you're one of them, but they need to see somebody who has courage again, because it's been a long time. And they need to see what faith looks like. And they need to see somebody suffer well and move through these difficult circumstances where they know they're helpless, but they live knowing that God at some point is going to act and save them. And granted, it won't be on our timeline. You think the bird was happy about being saved after it was in the trap? Or you think the people were happy being saved while they were drowning in the flood? We'd prefer no flood. We'd prefer no trap, but that's not the world we live in. But God does save. In fact, we know Jesus would have preferred if there was another way not to have been crucified. But he knew that was the only way, so he had courage, and he patiently endured that suffering with faith. A lot of you are looking at your calendars again, and you're reorganizing your lives for this next year. Do it with a little bravado. I want you to be a little cocky about your life. I want you to be confident in God acting in your life. And I want you to look to the forward with courage and with faith. Okay, quick word to men before we wrap up. Everybody should have courage. Everybody should look to the future with faith. I'm old school. I believe God has a call on every single person's life. If you exist and you have another day, it's because God has a call on your life for that day, for that week, that month, and that year. There's a reason you exist. There's some good you're supposed to bring into this world. You have a calling, something you're supposed to accomplish, right? Everybody has that. And I think we live in a culture that does not encourage men. And some men love to have it this way, where they don't increase in strength and they don't take their place among the world and they don't live boldly for Jesus, but they're content to be taken care of by other people. Don't be that guy. Don't be that guy. I know there's an epidemic with men right now being isolated and being lonely. And that's why at this church we start many men's groups that are small groups of men, and we get together and we have breakfast and we talk about important things, because we believe as men, if we can take our place in this world and we can protect our women, protect our children, if we can slay the dragons in our culture, if we can move toward the danger, and if we can move into the difficulties of life, and if all the strength of all the men is marshaled for good, do you think this would be a different city? Do you think this would be a different church? It would. And honestly, if you haven't had a black eye for a while, it's probably time to get another one. It's like you got to get off the couch, get into the fight, engage the world again. You know, I talk about gaming a lot, right? You know how long it takes me to beat a video game? About 1.5 years, sometimes 2 years. You know why? Because I almost never get to play it. So here's my rule of thumb. If you can beat a game in a month, you have too much time on your hands, man. Too much time on your hands. And I'm not saying be angry about the world and rail against the world and preach against the world. I'm saying go out and punch evil stuff. Go out and fix things in the world. So new year, new you. But as you do this plan, I want you to look back on your life and see all the great things God has done to save you when you couldn't save yourself. And then I want you to say, okay, how am I going to spend this year for God with confidence that he wants me to move into the world and he wants me to make it a better place? How will you face this year with courage? And I pray that the light of the courage of the church, and us not having little faith but having great faith, can bring more light into this world that is overwhelmed right now with fear and overwhelmed with cowardice. And we live in a culture that celebrates it in a million ways. So I'm begging you, church, to be countercultural in this regard, that we need to follow Jesus with faith, with confidence in the future, and we need to live with courage. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, I pray that you would help us to be courageous Christians. Help us not to be like those who shrink back and are destroyed, or who look away and flinch away from the world. Help us not to abandon the world. But Lord, help us to be those Christians who remember all the good things you have done for us. who remember all the wonderful blessings you've put in our life and all the wonderful situations where you saved us when we thought there was no salvation. When there's nothing we could do and we were helpless and you came in and you saved us. Help us to remember all those situations so we have confidence in the future that you will act. Lord, forgive us for being faithless and for facing situations as if you were not on our side. Forgive us for worrying, controlling, and trying to manipulate. And help us for living so much of our lives managing our anxieties and our fears. Lord, help us to trust you with this world that you do hold in your hands. Lord, I pray that you would clarify your calling on each person's life in this room. That you would show them the way their life is to go. And that whether that's achievable or not, Lord, that people would go for it and do it. That they would move with courage into the future. That they would raise brave, competent, godly children. That they would fight for their marriages. That they would destroy evil when they encounter it. And I pray that over all these things we would put on love. So that with love and compassion we can handle people gently and carefully and bring them into your kingdom and see them know you. Lord, pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.